to the Media Roundtable Special Edition, where we dive into the events and topics around the business of audio through the lens of the brands and buyers who support it. I'm your host, Jennifer Laine, and today I'm thrilled to share a project with you that we've been working on for the past couple of months, and it is with a company called Seekr. For those who aren't yet familiar with Seekr, Seekr is an independent internet technology company that provides a transparent, trustworthy digital experience by streamlining access to reliable information to support informed decision-making. Seekr is an alternative to existing search engines and offers objective results coupled with advanced information analysis to assist users in judging the quality of content. We actually began our conversation with the team at Seekr several months ago, where we had the opportunity to meet everyone. Not everyone, a very large concentration of their executive team at an event we hosted in New York in April called the CAO Summit, the CAO Club. Since then, we've collaborated on building a tool that applies their personal attack tracking capability to podcast. But more on that later. Right now, let's begin by getting to know Pat Condo, founder and CEO of Seekr, who is joining us today alongside Dan Granger, founder and CEO of Oxford Road. Welcome to the show, Pat and Dan.
Yeah, thank you.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, fun.
Well, we're thrilled to have you. I guess the best place to start would be at the beginning. We'd love to know sort of a little bit about your origin story as personally, and then we'll dive in more professionally. But what's the story of Pat Condo? Where did you begin your journey in search, but in life more broadly?
So I was born in Concord, New Hampshire, and I'm the oldest of five. And my father was a college professor in math, and my mother was a nurse, and so I had a pretty straightforward, upbringing outside of Boston, Massachusetts. And my grandfather and on my father's side, and that whole line were all very eclectic individuals. He was a surgeon that had come over during World War II, but his line goes back to as far back as we could trace it back into the Medici family, tree in
Wow.
Florence. And that all kind of ties in because my brother George is one of the world's most famous artists right now. And so you could see that line, but I sort of developed the quantitative side and he developed the creative side. And, went to high school and nothing extraordinary and weren't really too interested in college, but, I went to college, and when I got out of school, I couldn't find a job. And so I ended up as a substitute teacher at a vocational school in math. And, one of the things I learned there, which was, sort of relevant today, was that even then people were not allowed to make choices about what they wanted to do in life. They were economically challenged. They were family challenged. There were all sorts of things there that I had not, faced that I saw. There was all sorts of different biases that were put there on, particularly women at that point in time. And I learned a lot, and it didn't really sink in until later in life about how that can take control and set the course of your life at an early age. And so I feel like I was a little bit kind of lucky because after I did that for about 6 months, I went to work at Northrop Grumman, and they had a special project to build a missile system. And in those days, nobody could figure out, to build a navigation system that could take a rocket, 7,000 miles. And then ultimately I worked on the space shuttle. But to do that, they didn't have a computer like they had today. So people had slide rules and calculators and all these things.
What year are we talking, by the way?
We're talking about 1979, 80. Okay. And so when I did that, I went downstairs and I saw a computer that was being used to do payroll. And I said, why don't we use the computer to use it for for building a navigation system? And I just thought that was ordinary, but it wasn't. So that began my career in building, things around navigating from one spot to another. And it just sort of continued. I ended up getting different technical jobs, and finally that were all based upon, taking someone from one point to another. And it just sort of led to my career. And I'm still in it today.
Well, in your career, I mean, you're downplaying this so much, and I'll let you get away with it for what you've already said. But moving forward, so your career with Seekr is also navigation based with search, but this isn't your first search company.
No.
Do you want to tell us what your first company was, and then through to, I believe this is your fifth company.
Yeah. So when I in my mid 30s, I guess I was at a conference, and some people came up to me from an investment banking firm, Allen and Company in New York, and they said, "Would you be interested in joining this small company? We don't really know what it does. We invested in it." And I joined it. Name was Excalibur Technologies, and I joined in 1995. And within 5 years, we built the search technology platforms that existed in both government and in civil systems, and built about $100 million company and sold it to Intel for $1.2 billion, which was a real billion in those days. And then we had the dot-com meltdown, and I kind of sat on the advisory board of Intel for about a year. And then right after that, we had 9/11. And, I was invited to Langley at CIA to discuss with other companies what we could do to make a difference in the country. And I came up with the idea that we should build a search platform that could sit behind the firewall. It would be obfuscated, so nobody would know who was looking for who. And we raised $200 million to do that. I took that company public as well. And it became one of the largest suppliers of search technology to the defense and intelligence business. We tracked some of the 9/11 hijackers. We were involved in all sorts of high-end kinds of targeting and tracking of terrorists and things of that nature. And one of the programs that we worked on, which was something that I've brought back 5 years ago when I started Seekr, was all about how do you disrupt terrorist organizations. And one of the ways they do it is through feeding false and misleading information out into a network, causing chaos, confusion, people turning on themselves. Ultimately, you get whistleblowers, and then there's some type of action that takes place. Not too dissimilar to what's happening today in our social media, world, where all sorts of information floods and people take negative actions against each other. It's the same thing, except this time it's kind of being applied against us, not us applying it the other way.
Okay, so before we start going into the implications of that and how that takes us to today, I have a really ignorant, just clarifying question. When we think about search engines, and you're talking about building billion-dollar search companies that most people have never heard of.
Yeah.
Why do you need different technology for different search engines? What's the, for those of us that are just only understand this through the lens of consumer-facing brands, it sounds like there's a whole nother world we're not even aware of, many of us.
Oh, yeah. Well, there's multiple worlds like that. So, for instance, the average search engine probably today, if you go to Google or anything, you type 5, 6, 7 terms in there and you get an answer. In some of the applications that we worked in, you would have 40 or 50,000 terms as the query, because it's always what you don't know that's really important. So that's one big difference, is the scale of what you're looking for is very different. The second thing is that most search engines today are built around the advertising model, so it's the most popular answer that you get to the top of the list. But in the intelligence community, it's the right answer. It's the most credible answer. It's the one that sorts all the garbage out of the way so that I can see clearly what's going on. And sometimes, that's very different than most popular. And so that's another whole thesis here is that we're looking for most credible, not most popular.
And okay, and so those are they crawling the same information, the public systems and the private systems?
They could be, or they could be doing two things. So there's the public web that we all see, that we're all on. There's 2 billion websites, and it's really what Google and Microsoft crawl. That's what we get. But then below the surface, probably 4 or 5 times bigger than that, is the deep web and the dark web. So there even goes even further than that. And it requires different programming, it requires different skills, and there's all sorts of nefarious things on there. That's one example. Another example is that if you go and look at, well, what else comes in that an intelligence community looks at that a commercial community would not? And it's all sorts of voice, it's video, it's information from drones, it's information from it's machine generated information. It's all sorts of things that people today don't even touch the surface of. So there's another whole world of kind of information processing and search that are out there. And there are dozens and dozens of companies that are involved in that, but they're not classified as consumer web search like what you would call Google or Microsoft.
Very helpful. Thank you. All right, so tell me if you've ever heard of any of these companies. Indeed, Shopify, NetSuite, Headspace, Quip, Theragun, Postmates. I'm not only the host of the Media Roundtable, but also CEO of a company called Oxford Road, and we are the world's leading independently owned and operated audio ad agency. And what that means is that we help great companies, many that you have probably heard of on some of the other podcasts that you listen to. We help them test and scale campaigns in audio channels, with podcast being one of those leading channels. Some of the work that we do includes media planning and buying, as well as analytics, attribution, and insights. And we also have a very special way that we deal with creative and copy generation. We have our own proprietary process called Audiolytics that allows us to score ads for their persuasiveness. If you're looking to be involved in audio and you want a partner that can help work with you to make sure that you achieve unprecedented ROI and massive scale, you should get in touch with us at Oxford Road. And by the way, the only reason that we're able to do the work of the Media Roundtable is because we have a great team at Oxford Road that supports us and makes it possible. So, what we're doing is not just a podcast, but we're really trying to help brands live out their values and balance that with their business objectives, which is an increasingly hard thing to do in this world of misinformation and malice that's infecting so much of our media. But at Oxford Road, we don't want to just broker this stuff. We want to impact the industry for good. We want to raise the bar on what gets created. And Oxford Road is helping make that possible through the Media Roundtable. So if you're somebody that's interested in working with an ad agency or a partner on this type of work for your advertising campaigns, go to oxfordroad.com. It's easy to spell. And get in touch with us, or at least just sign up for our free newsletter, The Influencer. That's oxfordroad.com.
And so you mentioned the search for current engines is more geared towards advertising and less on credibility, which is the perfect segue into understanding what Seekr does. Do you want to dive into, for those who haven't yet heard about Seekr, do you want to walk the audience through a little bit of sort of how you got to Seekr, but then the functionality behind it?
Yeah. So the idea behind Seekr was really pretty basic. In 2016, our election, we had Brexit, we had the Cambridge Analytica issues. And I said, look, people, before 2020, people are going to want a news app, I believe, where they can look at the content in context, they can sort through different biases, they can get to, what's really being communicated here. And I thought that would be a pretty cool app to build, that would be useful, that would be doing some good. And so we began the construction of that. Little did we know what was going to come in front of us. So this was pre-virus, this was pre-election, this was pre-everything. And of course, as we know, as events unfolded, the scale of what was really taking place here became enormous, and the stakes became enormous, because in a democracy, what happens is that everyone uses the best information they can get, and then they vote. And that vote is what changes the course of history, right? So I felt, wow, we're really onto something here. And then as the issues about freedom of speech began to rise up, the issues of censorship, the issue of who controlled what information, and whether it was Twitter, Facebook, Google, whether it was media companies, all of a sudden you could just see the division forming, and that accelerated our efforts. And I said, look, there's a real value here, both to consumers on one end, and then as we learned, to advertisers a little bit later, we learned on the other. So on the consumer side, we said, wouldn't it be great if we could just give people some really simple ways to take a look at this stuff? And I think it would be great. And there's going to be a population of people want it. When 2020 election hit, I think, some big waves of people left all of the traditional, say, big tech companies. They went to Telegram, they went to Signal, they went to DuckDuckGo, they went to all these different places because they just ran away for a variety of reasons from big tech. And I said to myself, well, this is sort of perfect for us, because the next wave that's coming are people aren't so worried now about the government surveilling them. That's a percentage of people. Now they're worried about, am I getting the right information? Is it quality? Is it something I can rely on? And by the way, the vote's the vote. And now everybody understands that too. So the impetus to build it was all in that preamble that I gave you. But the technology to build it is really complicated, because it takes two things to do it. One is it takes a search engine. And the reason it does is because, remember I told you that one of the things a search engine does is it crawls the web, it indexes it, it categorizes and classifies. So if you're going to look at 100 different media companies, we could do that by hand. If you're going to look at 1,000, it gets challenging. If you're going to look at 30,000 media companies who are pushing out a story every second, and you're going to analyze in real time and have to deliver that, well, that takes something special. That's a lot harder to do. Not the average garage startup can even come close to that. Then the second part of it, which is really complex, is how do you learn what that article's about? So the computer is dumb, right? You have to train it. And so the way you train it is, okay, take a look at this story and look at the construction of the terms, look at the positioning of the words, look at the vocabulary, look at the complexity of it. This is a obituary. This is an op-ed. This is an investigative piece. This is a parody. This is a satire. This is a comedy. This is a tragedy. And it goes on, because humans have incredibly complex communication. Even if they have a limited vocabulary, all these things are complicated. And we said, well, now how do we figure out a way to rate this, to be able to look at what are the subliminal suggestions? What are the cognitive biases? What are the failed terms of journalism that are here? So we took it to modeling these things, and we said, okay, let's look at some real simple things. What are the top 10 principles of journalism that we learn in middle school, right? What are those things? Does the headline match the body? Are the sources have an attribution? Are there personal attacks? The spelling, the grammar, is this a translated piece from, using Google Translate? So we went through that whole process. And then we said, but there's more to this. There's the subliminal suggestions that occur. These are where the biases come. This is where it's about race or religion, or it's about gender. It's about, the cognitive things that people, when they lock onto them, they don't even feel it because it's touching them. So they go right down that rabbit hole of saying, I agree with this. That's the confirmation piece. So that's
can you break that down into like a statement? Like, what's a use case? It sounds like you're talking about like dog whistle terms.
So a dog whistle would be, let's talk about, I don't know, student debt relief. And then in the middle, somebody reaches out and says, by the way, Donald Trump is a criminal and he should go to jail, and blah, 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 right? That's clearly a case of where the headline has lured you in and immediately it's a personal attack, right? Mm-hmm. A dog whistle is something slightly more clever. A dog whistle might be the terms that, say, a white supremacist might use, or a racist may use, that maybe you and I don't even know what they are, but they're in there. And, some allusion to Nazism, or some allusion to, something where it's not obvious, but to the people that know, it's in there. And dog whistle is a big problem in certainly a lot of different chat rooms, and certainly across, various social media, platforms, that narrative is pretty damaging because it takes a while for you to pick it up. And by the time you've picked it up, you're already in it.
And one question about your models: how much variance exists between different types of categories in the model structure?
So categories meaning
sort of like obituary to comedy.
Yeah. So there are some big variances. So in an investigative piece, one of the key things that you would see in there are going to be source attribution. Sources close to the White House, a person in law enforcement, somebody that was close to the victim, right? All of those would be less credible than quoting Jennifer on the scene of an accident, right? That is more credible than saying a person close to the victim saw a car hit her walking across the street. Or so we look for, we go deep on some of like the investigative side. An obituary we found was complicated because an obituary has a lot of statements in it, like lived here from X to Y, had 5 grandchildren, was buried here, those kind of things. But there are sometimes people add more content to obituaries. And when they start adding the content to it, it starts to go through the other signal analysis, which says, okay, what is this, an exaggeration? Like they were the most famous person from Brooklyn, right? So you get these exaggerations and things. So but we had to separate, okay, we're not going to rate that obituary the same because it's just somebody writing about some loved one, and it's not that meaningful compared to an op-ed that would say the same thing. So a lot of it's got to do with the position of it and the structure, and the author themselves is another area where we extract insights. So we also keep track of not only the media company or the article, but also the author themselves. And we keep track of how they're rated, because a person that writes an op-ed, Tom Friedman, let's say, he's always in the New York Times. He writes about the Middle East quite frequently, but is he an expert on climate change in Argentina? Well, I don't know. So let's see. And so there's things like that. And ultimately, what we ended up building over the course of time is a massive library of rated content, rated by all sorts of ways, rated by the ways that we just spoke about, rated by political lean. We extracted all these quotes, we've rated authors, and pretty soon you can, if you start to pull in the 30 or 40,000 sources that everyone in the United States, or let's call it English-speaking areas, rely on, you pretty much have what is happening in the world today. You have what's rated, what isn't. And then you can, of course, go to the next step, which is to apply AI to generate the insights on rated content that give you even further, let's call it insightful views of trends that you may be interested in. And that's where I think all this is going. How do you give somebody content in context? And I think the only way is to cut right through all the different layers that exist on a particular story or a cause or a person.
And so as a consumer, when I go to Seekr.com, SEEKR, I can see a rating that is 1 to 100. Could you walk the audience through sort of what the hero components of that rating are? I know you've just listed some of the subcomponents, but what are the hero components that are visible to a consumer?
Well, I think that the first is that when we developed this scale, it was incredibly complicated. And the first round was, how do we simplify it so that everybody could understand that our design was like be the Uber, if we could, where you could take a complex transportation system and put it on an app that anybody can use. So how could we do that with Seekr when, first of all, there was a collection of people that may not even believe the information is false? And then the second is, how do you display it? And so we looked around and we had a couple of versions of it, and we ultimately came up with the idea of the FICO score model, because everybody who's old enough to vote or get a loan always looks at their FICO score. That's if they don't know anything, they end up knowing their credit score. And I thought, well, maybe that's an interesting way to explain how one can look at this. So the very first idea is that this goes from how many less credible items are in your story, and the more incredulous they are, the lower the score. And so, and the more credible and the more things cited along journalistic principles or the less bias, the higher the score. So it as you get towards medium and high, these are people who have cited sources. There's no title exaggeration generally. The author themselves and the source are verifiable. So you get more and more towards, okay, a very high rating means, it doesn't mean the story is true or false. It means that they've presented a story that is well documented, meets standards of journalism that everybody would support, and has no cognitive biases built in. That's a high score. The opposite occurs when those other three things are present.
I want to dig in on that. So take a fun topic like lab leak theory and or Hunter's laptop, which is also a fun, that's a crowd pleaser, right? So your system doesn't necessarily have to be dependent on fact checking what the latest known conclusions are, but truly by just looking at the way the arguments are constructed, you can say, well, whether or not it came to the right conclusion, it followed the right practices. And it sounds like that's the case that the system can make.
Yeah, fact checking, as we know, has been sort of a weaponized tool, like that the political campaigns have used. I'll fact check you, but you know, on only the things I want to fact check. And it's really difficult to do something like fact checking because, first of all, what is a fact? I mean, we get into big debate about that. So we decided we would never go down that route. Now, ultimately, what we want to do is get finer and finer grain ranking where, you know, it gets to the point where the person has presented a brilliant argument. They've used it all the right ways to present it. Now, the next step is you need to use your own critical thinking skills to believe, okay, you know, take it to the next step. I can't bring it to the next step saying, therefore, this is true, or therefore, this is false. I don't want to be in that business. It doesn't make sense, but it makes sense to show people that the general trend here is that this is probably not going to be truthful, and this has probably got a higher percent chance of being truthful.
Well, that's interesting because there has been so much discussion around the topic of misinformation and disinformation. And the problem we have in the advertising business is like, one, whose word are you going to take for that? Because one person's misinformation is another person's fake news. And it's like, we can't even agree on the definitions of terms. So there's a very interesting approach you've taken. One other thing you said that I just want to just get you to kind of clarify here is it sounds like, you know, we talk about it in terms of genres, but, you know, there might be a better label for whether it's an obit or an investigative piece or whatever. But then you get into things like comedy, which are really, really challenging because do you want to have the same expectations of a news organization that you do of a comedian? And how far do you let that go? Is it safe to say that the bones are the same of the process that you're running, but maybe they're graded on a curve depending on where they are, or are there different bones applied to the different categories of content?
So think of it as signals, right? So that we train the models on different articles or different stories that, let's say, we might take 100,000 human-determined comedies and learn and build a model based on, well, what are the structure of the language in a comedy? You know, what happens in that comedy? And that then gives us a signal that says, you know what, this might be a comedy. And if it's a comedy, we would treat it differently than if it was an investigative piece. So it's all about the learning model. That's the key. So we have to learn all of the different themes, let's say, that can be created. And one of the big, going to the next step on this, which is, synthetic content can also do similar things, right? It can create a comedy, it can create a tragedy, it can create a satire. And so people used to say, well, can you detect what's synthetic and what isn't? And I think the answer is we just run it through the machine, and it doesn't almost matter. In one sense, it matters whether the quality of the content stands up. Somebody could use AI in support of writing a story and generate something that has high quality, the same way you could, as a human, could write a report that's low quality. So it all depends upon what you're trying to index, and it can get pretty complicated because if you think about, we think about things like, how about the combination of text and emojis? What does that mean? There's all sorts of things you can begin to get into in terms of how to analyze communication and language. So we're at the very beginning, is what I would say. And that's what kind of makes it, I think, a little bit exciting, because there's so much area that we can go into around how you can apply these technologies to video and even, further than that, combinations of image and video together. I mean, there's so many different things. So we have a ways to go, but the beginning of it is all kind of a signal analysis. How do you separate signal from the noise? And when you see something, you call it out as an animality and you put a rating on it.
Love it. And how many other groups would you say are working on this problem right now?
Well,
how crowded is the space? How do you see the landscape and your position within it?
Well, I think that there's a whole host of companies that are out there with humans that are rating content, and humans are inherently biased. And we said, why would we follow that path when the whole idea was to wring out all those biases and try to create something that was similar to something like machine vision, where it sees a circuit board, it puts the chip in it, and it moves on, and there's no variance, right? But with humans, there's always a variance. I'm looking at this article, and all of a sudden, today I decide that's biased. Yesterday I decided it wasn't. And so we built these algorithms, and we started with the whole idea that this has got to be completely autonomous, driven by the system, driven by the algorithms. Now, how do we support our use of the algorithm? What's the definition of the algorithm? What's the transparency? All that's on us to supply that to the public, which we are doing. But once people understand that how all that's set, and that the computer's just doing its job, and it's going to say whatever this is the answer, whether it's left, right, center, we don't care. Whether whoever wrote it, New York Times or some blog, the blog could be better than the New York Times. We don't care. It's the application of the technology in a uniform, persistent way that really matters. And that's what we strive for. And that's what we're continuing to push. So that sets us apart from anybody, because nobody's doing that today. Not anyone that we could see. We've talked to lots of private equity companies that see every company under the sun. We've talked to some of the big cloud companies that are interested in us, and nobody's seen anything like this. And so it's really a new way to apply capabilities that have been around a while, right? Biases, people, some of them are 100 years old. They're well documented. And the same thing with principles of journalism. What we were kind of clever enough to do is convert them to software and combine them with search. And nobody's done that. In fact, we filed for patents for all those things, and we believe we're going to get those.
speaking of doing things differently, let's now transition to the applications your team has created for a podcast. I know this is just the beginning, but when we started having these conversations back in April, maybe even before, one of the most important areas from our side where we saw a hole in the market was trying to understand and measure the level of a personal attack from podcast host to topic to guest and beyond. And we saw that Seekr had done sort of an excellent job at measuring attack already, and we wanted to walk through with you how that could work for podcast, and how it could be applied for podcasts, and how it could be measured, et cetera. So maybe let's start from the product side, like how you guys transitioned that technology, or optimize that technology for audio and transcript in a way that you hadn't yet done for written content or video.
Yeah, so, I would say that initial conversations with Dan gave me a lot of ideas. We had looked at podcasts, but we hadn't really thought about it in the way that was presented to us. So when I went back, I said, look, what can we do here? And, the first example was, okay, well, let's look at can we do this at a massive scale? Meaning, can we create a solution that, we could index, tens of thousands of these videos, these podcasts, and be able to, extract from them and create some type of score. And so we started to look at how we would do that. And, we've just scratched the surface, right? Because we're looking at obviously the speech to text conversion, and we analyze the text, and we pull out a lot of different ideas out of the text about what would represent a personal attack, what represents even more than that. But where we can go with this, which I think is going to be interesting, is that we're going to start to look at the speaker's volume, the speaker's vocabulary, their grammar, the phraseology, anticipatory kind of phrases, predictive phrases, because I think where everybody wants to go, and probably mostly the advertisers, is ultimately they would love to do something equivalent to an interstitial type of an ad where they can in real time insert these things rather than wait till afterwards, right? And I think where we're headed with this is, how can we hear enough, see enough, feel enough in the language to be able to now start taking another big leap forward in the analysis of these podcasts. And I think it's pretty fascinating because if you think about that market, it's the largest market growth right now that has the least amount of advertisers.
And the least amount of regulation when it comes to things like tools available for determining or providing transparency when it comes to topics like this. So one follow-up question, which I realize may be important to our audience, is from a very top level, can you describe the Civility Score, which Seekr has just released in beta last week?
Yeah, so it's a range, and so where we there's a kind of let's call it a definitions of what's abusive, and then there are definitions of what might be popular phraseology. Like today, people using swears in content, in their discussion doesn't necessarily indicate an attack or anybody being vicious. Like it's part of the vernacular. So there's some level of moderation of, here's the definition of what's an abusive attack versus here's mild kidding in the same, using maybe some colorful language. And so we've been able to put a score against those things and create these definitions. And then the idea would be, we would go to an advertiser and we'd say, look, here's our definitions. If this fits within your comfort zone, when this kind of a defined set of terms and language come up, you're comfortable putting an ad there. But if it comes up in the following context, maybe you are, maybe you aren't. And that's what we're trying to get to, so the Civility Score is about, it's kind of modeled after, I hate to say it, Cicero's 7 7 levels of how to have a conversation. And all of them are about balance. All of them are about the ability of somebody to have a point of view, somebody to have an objective kind of, and the person on the other side understanding it, stepping in their shoes, saying, I see what you mean, having a conversation back and forth. And only when it, veers off course, where it starts to become imbalanced, and that imbalance starts to get personal, and the personal starts to get aggressive, does it start to fall outside of that, the boundaries of what we would call a civilized conversation. But we have, 7 sort of steps as to what those are, and we kind of built that into the philosophy of it.
So, Pat, I know why we were excited about this partnership, and from our point of view, why the Civility Score was so important. But from where you sit, analyzing data from so many different perspectives and knowing, you've got GARM as an industry standard right now with 12 different categories, and we went a different direction. For you, why is the Civility Score important culturally or for the business community? Why civility of all things?
I learned from the last 30-something years of being in business that the very first thing is to be able to have a conversation, put yourself in somebody else's shoes, listen to with an open kind of point of view, and you learn a lot. And a podcast is all about someone listening on the other end, right? So the idea is that if they're listening to garbage, and then in consuming garbage, then they're not going to be very good people over time. And so putting the Civility Score on it kind of starts to take the edge off those people. I'll use Alex Jones as a person, as an example, right? There's a terrible individual that if anybody had put the Civility Score on that, maybe half of those people would have thought he was a nut and never bothered, right? But instead, he carried, all those people forward for years. Millions of people believed what he was saying. And I was sitting there saying, this is like outrageous. But then I realized that there's thousands of podcasts like that. What are people listening to? So I said, well, the score is really important, because I think to get to the next level of society, people need to understand each other. And so the Civility Score to me is really important at that level. At another level, I understand that brands, some of them have spent 100 years building their reputation. All it takes is being put next to one bad piece of content and it's gone. And we've seen that. It's shocking how quickly that happens, how it gets viral, how it gets out of control. There's no explanation. You can't stop it sometimes. It's like a nuclear reaction that went off, and that's the chain reaction that follows. So I feel those things are really important. And when I met you in Oxford, I felt you had the same objectives. You'd been trying to do this with another group. And when we came in, I thought it was, so interesting, because you gave us a lot of different viewpoints that we considered when we built our product, and having you represent us in what we're trying to do is, has been fantastic. We couldn't have done it without you.
Well, thank you. And I'll just share, from my perspective, we've been at this whole podcast that we're talking on. This all came out of the societal problem, which is now infecting our business and most people's business, which people can't talk to each other. And some topics are unsafe. And how do we live in a world where, especially when we were all locked at home, and our electronic ways of communicating with each other, some things were unmentionable or had to be mentioned in a certain way. And that was really, we didn't think that was a good solution. But also, I think to your point, like when you're talking about, you look at indicators and journalistic practices, and you don't necessarily have to have the smoking gun that says true or lie or misinformation or factual. You look at how the integrity of the system is built, and it should help you make those choices on your own. And in the same way, we looked at this and we said, look, we're never going to get people to agree on misinformation. And yeah, we can count the swear words, and there's a lot of variables that I think individual brands need to consider because of their particular brand. But what is one overarching thing that we can all kind of say, all right, if they get this right, everything else will probably fall into place. And it was real simple. It's the golden rule. How do they treat other people, whether they agree with them or not? And, with businesses, there is so much pressure on them right now. And the way the market was behaving is it came in the form of like these advertiser dictates, no news, no politics, no conservatives. So now we've just ruled out the ability to reach half the country. Yeah. And none of that's good for market share, and none of that's good for a national conversation. When you look over the horizon and you see the potential future as AI speeds up, and where we have no really effective rules to govern what content people can access, if we're successful on this journey at scale, what does that world look like? And what does it look like if nobody does anything like this?
So I think that it's a long journey, but I think that it starts with young people, and it starts with where we have to educate young people at an early age on how to be critical thinking, because that's really what it comes down to. Is there are people that are in their 50s and 60s and 70s locked into cable news, locked into their echo chamber, and that's not going to change. That's not really where all this is going to happen. It's going to happen at 7, 8, 9 years old, when kids are dealing with each other and they're happy to be with whomever they're with on playgrounds or in the school, and they don't think anything of this stuff. This stuff doesn't come till later in life, right? But it comes from the influence of their family, that in how they're brought up. And so I feel like in the absence of anything other than the educational system, that's really where it has to go. It has to somehow get into that system that everything you read is not true. People used to say that all the time, but it's more so now than ever. And you want people to be able to discern between things. You want people to be able to not be bullied by following in a particular group or having to go down a particular path. And look, it's not going to happen. It's, there's always a percentage of people that don't care about that. But I think the younger generation should be the target. They should be where people are focused, because if that doesn't happen, then all you're going to end up is a completely, divided world and the idea that, all people are the same, really, right? They all have the same basic needs, and they all have the same desires, and they all have the same goals. It's just that if you don't let people have a conversation, if you don't let people connect with each other, if the minute you talk about something different, you shut it down because it's something you don't want to talk about, that's one thing. But if you object in a way that represses people, I think you go backwards. And I think I'm hoping that people have learned that going backwards is not good. In the last 4 years has not been pleasant for anybody, right? And so, there's more problems within families because of these things than ever existed before. You can't even have a different political view in your family, or a different view on anything, religion, or how you treat your body. Every one of them is inflammatory, it's argumentative, and sometimes it ends in friendships or families broken apart. Well, that's happening everywhere. It's not just here. And so I think that if we don't address it, which is start young, get these kids to understand that, get them to realize that everything they read isn't true, and to look at a bunch of different ways to look at things. And if we don't start there, then it's not going to get repaired. But I see a lot of effort to do it. The same effort that people are focusing on, what's happening to our environment. Well, let's put the same kind of energy as to what's happening to our kids.
Totally agree. And, one of the concerns we've seen coming out of all this polarization is the path of a world where you don't just disagree, but you actually you stop doing business with each other.
Yeah.
Where you have red pipes and blue pipes. If you think one way, you're on Twitter. If you think another way, you're on, Threads, or, is there going to be a Disney red and a Disney blue? how do you deal with this so that it doesn't actually facilitate the divisions at scale and nurture that? And I think from the commercial perspective is very powerful for the people who fund these things to start speaking out about speech. So one other thing I'd love for you to comment on is what happens. I mean, we all kind of see the problem. I think that when the social dilemma came out, consumers started better understanding what was going on behind the scenes. But where does it go if private industry doesn't solve this? Can government do it? Can it be left to the platforms? I know platforms are trying to do it, but what's the downside of those paths?
Well, I think the downside of too much government is that it starts to become authoritarian. And when it starts to move to authoritarian, it starts to move towards, various restrictions on liberties that we've all enjoyed. And they could be little to start and they can get big. And so there's a fine line between how that all happens. And I think United States has been very good on the balancing act of all of that. But there are, there could be occasions where it could slip, the other way, so to speak. And 60% of the world is run by, maybe 66, by authoritarian governments. And so, their whole objective is to have the whole world run that way, not have a democracy there in front of them. And so, that's a big issue for us, right? The two biggest democratic countries in the world are the United States and India. And together, with the rest of let's say Europe, we make up about 2 billion people, but there's 7 billion in the world. So those people in that, that are run by those governments and those governments themselves see us as a problem. And so everything that, part of what I get concerned about is the flood of nation state content that comes in to try to push us more and more towards that. So I think if we, don't walk that line, and I think we cross to where the government says, you know what, I'll take care of this. You know what, I'll take care of that. Pretty soon you start to look like, one of those governments versus the one we have. That part that's, I think, very scary.
We couldn't agree with you more. And that's one of the main reasons we're so happy to be working on this tool in its current iteration, as well as all future iterations together with you. Yeah. I think I could speak for Dan when I say we can continue this conversation for 2 more hours and have this be the length of a Joe Rogan episode. Yeah. However, you mentioned volume of voice, you mentioned grouping of phrases. You mentioned a few other iterations that we're getting into for podcast, which I think we're really excited about. And we haven't yet seen that level of contextualization in a tool, a brand safety and suitability tool for podcast just yet. We'd love to hear a little bit more about what product features you have slated for either podcast or even Seekr more broadly for those who are wanting to use or wanting to have a deep desire for transparency in search and want to know what's coming.
Yeah, so some of the things, the structure of imagine you're watching a video and there are 3 things that we are experimenting with. One is facial expressions and what that can mean as people are speaking about a particular topic. So think CEO talking about the next product launch and how do you know, what are the tells that indicate that somebody's uncomfortable with, we're releasing product X next quarter, but there's something in the voice, there's something in the buildup, maybe his hands go up, maybe he looks the wrong way. Those are all little tells that may say it's not going to happen. So there are things like that. There are volume in how somebody speaks is really important. The volume and the tonality of it is really important. And so we'll capture that. And then there's, of course, what's going on in the background, right? So are there signs, people protesting? Well, what do the protesting signs say? How is that relevant to the conversation? So we're looking at the ability to index all all of this kind of signal analysis and then provide somebody with an output as to what's really going on here, and give them a little bit more insight into what this may be all about. So that's one of the kind of the advanced development items that we're looking at. But in the near term, there are two things that are important. One is continuing to build out what we're doing with podcast and adding those things to it. But the second is that we continue to iterate on our user interface and how we want to display this information to people and how we want to brand the company and get people engaged in the content. And the next wave will be with all the generative AI that we're going to produce that will allow you to ask for things or request things that we can do a very deep dive in that nobody else can. So you could say something like, give me all the quotes on X politician over the last 3 months that were related to this particular problem, and we could produce them immediately, and you could see the timeline of them. You could see, what articles they were in, et cetera. So there's all sorts of things that we're going to do to help you extract insights, help you look at summaries, how you can look at trends really quickly in rapid fashion. And as you start to engage with the system, it will start to understand you a little bit more and start to give you even more than you might have asked for.
As much as I hate to do this, I want to say thank you, but we're about out of time. This will inevitably be the first of many conversations as we continue working together and understanding more about Seekr in general. And I mean, who better to talk about it than its founder and CEO? We'd love to have more people from the team in future episodes as everybody can speak to different facets of the product. With that, I think this is the most true time I have read what I'm about to say in our wrap, and that's not a testament necessarily to the other podcasts, but it's just so relevant today. This podcast is brought to you by Oxford Road, where we want you to succeed in audio and to use influence for good. As members of the marketing community, we have the power to advance voices that don't just entertain, but edify, to build bridges instead of burning them, and to rise above our differences and show that collaboration is possible when we treat others with respect. A special thank you to Pat Condo and the team at Seekr. If you're a marketer looking to find out more about Seekr's Civility Score or would like to participate in the beta program, please visit seekr.com/audio-score. That's seekr.com/audio-score, or email anyone at Oxford Road to find out more. Additionally, if you're a marketer looking to align with our vision, reach out to our agency, Oxford Road, by visiting oxfordroad.com and subscribing to our weekly newsletter, The Influencer. Thank you to our guests, to Pat LaCroix and Ed Petru from Seekr, as well as Bianca Kyle and Haley from our team and the team at Podcast One. And as always, influence responsibly.